Welcome back to A History of Horror, where we'll be going over a series of horror movies from the past 100 years. Earlier in this series, we went over the classic monsters that had become famous during Hollywood's golden age. While the taste for horror declined, and the US went through their science fiction craze, the London-based studio Hammer Films got their opportunity to shine. During this time, Hammer kept the Gothic genre alive with reboots of classic monsters like Dracula, Frankenstein, and The Mummy. The first one to achieve widespread fame was Horror of Dracula, which was directed by Terence Fisher and premiered in England in 1958. It was simply called Dracula in Europe, but the prefix was added for American audiences to avoid any confusion with the 1931 Universal version. With it being a newer take on the Dracula series, it's the first movie to feature the vampire in color, alongside scantily clad women, plenty of cleavage, and lots of bright red blood. When watching this movie, you have to remember that it was the 50s, so anything that showed this kind of graphic violence was really pushing the edge. The story is like the other film adaptations, in that they're a retelling of the Bram Stoker novel, but with many liberties taken with the plot. You know, I don't think there's a single Dracula movie that exists completely faithful to the book, but what can you do? The changes don't necessarily take away from the story, but they're clearly different. Instead of Jonathan Harker traveling to Transylvania to sell real estate, he's applying to be Dracula's librarian, with the ulterior motive to slay all the vampires in the castle. There's also no Renfield, no journey to England, instead it all takes place in Transylvania. A few other adjustments were made for the script, but despite the changes, it all comes together nicely, and it's coupled with some fantastic sets and costumes. Van Helsing eventually arrives to the scene, also on the hunt for Dracula, and the two of them together make one of the best dynamics to ever share the screen. The dichotomy between Dracula and Van Helsing reminds me of what we would later see between Michael Myers and Dr. Loomis in the Halloween movies. Overall, it's a great standalone film in my opinion. Peter Cushing plays an awesome Van Helsing, portraying the character with strength and class.
You called me in for a second opinion. If I am to help your sister-in-law, there are certain things you must do to help me. However unorthodox they may appear.
Yes, I know, but...
Madam, if you love Miss Lucy, be guided by me, I beg you.
Dracula is played by Christopher Lee, and his depiction of the vampire is my favorite. Lugosi was great, but I personally think Lee's depiction really brought out the evil of Dracula that I wanted to see. He was so good that he was cast for each of the sequels. Dracula, Prince of Darkness, Dracula Has Risen from the Grave, Taste the Blood of Dracula, Scars of Dracula, Dracula AD 1972, and The Satanic Rites of Dracula. Cushing and Lee would meet again in other Hammer films, with Cushing taking the leading role as Victor Frankenstein in his respective series. They're equally as entertaining, so I would certainly recommend checking those out as well. Curse of Frankenstein, The Revenge of Frankenstein, The Evil of Frankenstein, Frankenstein Created Woman, Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, The Horror of Frankenstein, and lastly, Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. Say what you will about Hammer, they had some kick-ass titles. Well, thank you all for watching. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. I'll see you next time.